While on the lam for 2.5 years, a Japanese man wanted for the murder of a British woman says he scissored off his lower lip, dug 2 moles out of his cheek with a box cutter and gave himself a nose job in an attempt to obscure his identity. The disclosures come in a book released and written from jail by Tatsuya Ichihashi, who murdered and raped his English teacher, Lindsay Hawker. 22-year-old Lindsay Hawker was born in Coventry, England. She graduated with first-class honor in biology from the University of Leeds. She had plans to continue with her master's, but first, she wanted to explore the world. Like many others, she decided to work as an English teacher in Japan for a year. Hawker was found dead in a sand-filled bathtub on the balcony of Ichihashi's apartment in Chiba, east of Tokyo, in March 2007. Ichihashi, arrested in 2009 after a lengthy nationwide manhunt, admits to taking Hawker's life in the book until the arrest. But he doesn't describe the crime or his motives, instead detailing his life at large, during which he traveled up and down the country, in constant fear of arrest and obsessed with cosmetic surgery. Born in 1979, Tatsuya Ichihashi was born with a good familial background, his father being a doctor and his mother being a dentist. Even though Tatsuya graduated from the University of Chiba in 2005, he decided to live off his parents, where he reportedly received an approximate allowance of 100,000 yen monthly. Tatsuya did not have any criminal priors, but allegedly he did rob and assaulted a man, but that case was settled with a little hush money from his parents. Tatsuya was known to be a loner. He did have great physical stamina as he loved his workouts and cycled 25 kilometers daily. On March 20, 2007, Lindsay Hawker was on her way home after her English teaching job at Nova School. She met 28-year-old Tatsuya Ichihashi, who claimed that he was one of her students, but she denied it. She tried to cycle away, but Tatsuya was persistent. Athletically fit, he ran after her to her apartment. Out of breath, he asked if he could get a glass of water. Since this stranger now knows where she lived, she believed it was best to let Tatsuya in her apartment and made sure to introduce him to her housemates. It was a precautionary step to let Tatsuya know that she did not live alone. When he was inside, he proposed that Lindsay could teach him English. The lesson will be for $42 per hour, a much higher rate than average. Lindsay agreed with the condition that the lesson would be conducted in a public place. Lindsay's workplace, Nova School, does allow their teachers to hold their own private teaching sessions as long as the teachers report back the necessary details. Before Tatsuya left, he did a quick sketch of Lindsay and left his details, including his name, telephone number, and email address. 4 days later, they met in a cafe. At the end of the lesson, Tatsuya said he left his wallet back at his apartment. Again, Lindsay took precautionary steps by asking the taxi to wait for her, and she would be right down to head to another place. Unfortunately, after 7 minutes of waiting, the taxi driver left to accept another call. The next day, Lindsay's housemates reported her missing. So did Lindsay's workplace when Lindsay failed to show up for 2 of her classes consecutively. Lindsay's parents, back in UK, 8 hours behind Japan's time zone, were worried when their daughter, who regularly checked in, failed to check in after an earthquake in Japan that day. With Tatsuya's information left behind in Lindsay's apartment, the police headed over to his apartment complex to investigate. However, Japanese law forbids law enforcement to knock on Tatsuya's apartment without a proper cause. Tatsuya fled as soon as he noticed the police's presence. With 9 police officers scattered around the apartment complex without radio communication and Tatsuya's agility, he managed to escape barefooted. The policeman did manage to snatch his rucksack that contained workout clothing. Inside Tatsuya's apartment, police found Lindsay's items scattered on the floor. On his balcony, they found a hand sticking out of a pile of soil in a bathtub. That night, Tatsuya's neighbor heard a strange metal sound dragging across the floor. It was assumed that was the time Tatsuya moved his bathtub to the balcony. The hand belonged to Lindsay. Her long brown hair was shaved off. Her badly bruised and bound body was buried under a mixture of sand and soil, where Tatsuya got the material from 6 different hardware stores. It was said he either planned to wait for the body to decompose or to bury the body under cement. The autopsy showed that Lindsay was beaten, raped, and strangulated for at least 3 minutes to death. When the evidence were presented in the trial later, Lindsay's father, Bill Hawker, said, "The worst part was when they said Lindsay wet herself. She must have been absolutely petrified to do that. It made me feel physically sick to hear. Lindsay's parents flew all the way from UK to assist in any way they could to seek justice for their daughter. They spared no expense to assist in the search, flying multiple times to Japan to plead the public for help. The reward for information went up to 10 million yen. Police released pictures of Tatsuya, including a picture of him disguised as a woman, and even printed full-sized cardboard of him. Police raided love hotels nearby, as love hotels are a good spot to hide as they are usually without or with little surveillance. All of Tatsuya's sightings were fruitless. Unknowns to the police at this point, Tatsuya was hiding in one of the many islands of Japan, surviving off fishes and wildlife he caught. He never stayed too long at one same place. To prevent the public from identifying him, he attempted to perform plastic surgery on himself. He cut off the moles on his face and snipped his lips. But his self-performing surgery wasn't enough. He wanted a more drastic appearance change. He then started patronizing clinics to perform plastic surgeries on him, including a nose lift. This was a trap that he dug for himself, for that was how the police were finally able to track him. Many of the clinics performing these cosmetic surgeries would take a before and after picture for reference. It was when Tatsuya submitted his before picture, the clinic realized that they had a suspected fugitive present. Along with this, another tip soon came in from Tatsuya's co-worker from a construction company. Tatsuya's fingerprint was taken from his dorm, confirming his identity and current known location. After 32 months of eluding the police, Tatsuya was finally arrested on a ferry terminal where he was bound for an island in Okinawa. Initially, Tatsuya was only charged for abandoning a body. For 23 days, the maximum allowed days of questioning, he refused to confess to murdering Lindsay. When he finally confessed, he said it was an accident. He did punch, bound, and rape Lindsay. His choking went too far, as he only wanted to prevent Lindsay from screaming during her rape. He attempted to resuscitate her but failed. After 4.5 years, justice was served. Tatsuya Ichihashi was sentenced to life in prison. He was only spared from the death penalty as he was only 32 years old at that time, and he had no criminal priors and could possibly be rehabilitated. There is a possibility that Tatsuya might be released after serving 10 years with his entitlement to parole if he meets the conditions required. When the verdict was finally released, Lindsay's father, Bill, thanked all those who helped out in the investigation. He added, Lindsay, came here, she loved the children of Japan. I now feel as if Japan has not let her down. In 2013, Tatsuya released a book titled Taito Sararumade, Kohaku no Nainen Nanakajetsu no Kuroku, Until the Arrest, the blank 2 years and 7 months, where he recounted the times he was eluding the police. He offered the royalties to Lindsay's family, and understandably so, they refused. In February 2004, Carlie Brucia was kidnapped from a Florida car wash a mile from her house, and found dead just a few days later in a field behind a church. On the evening of February 1, 2004, an 11-year-old girl named Carlie Brucia was abducted in Sarasota, Florida while walking 1 mile from her friend's house to her own home. She was found dead in a field by a church 5 days later in a crime that sent shockwaves throughout her community. Carlie Brucia was just 11 years old when she was abducted and murdered in her own hometown. Carlie Jane Brucia was born on March 16, 1992. By 1993, her mother and father had divorced, with Brucia visiting her Long Island family during the summer and winter school breaks. Brucia was living with her mother Susan Shorpen and her stepfather in Sarasota when the unthinkable happened on that February evening. Brucia had been sleeping over at a friend's house and was headed home to watch the Super Bowl that evening. It was around 6:15 p.m. when she began her 1-mile walk back to her house. Her friend's mother, Connie Arnold, had called Brucia's mother to check that it was okay for her to walk, and Shorpen replied that she did not want Brucia walking along the busy Bee Ridge Road. She consequently sent her husband to pick her up, but he never found her. Brucia's parents called 911 around 7:30 p.m., and police initiated a large-scale search for Brucia as the unbearable hours ticked by. Then around midday the following day, police bloodhounds tracking Brucia's scent came upon Evie's car wash at 4735 Bee Ridge Road. The dogs tracked the scent behind the car wash before it suddenly vanished.
Footage taken from the car wash's motion sensor cameras showed a man in a mechanic's uniform leading Brucia by the arm at 6:21 p.m. the previous evening.
Police rewound the tape and saw a yellow Buick driving into the parking lot 3 minutes before her recorded abduction. The footage was immediately released to the media and an Amber Alert was issued for Brucia, but it would be to no avail. Though Brucia's abductor was quickly identified from the footage as a local mechanic named Joseph Peter Smith, it was already too late for Brucia. Police eventually received Smith's address, and authorities learned that the suspect was actually on parole for drug offenses. The previous year, Smith had violated parole twice, but authorities decided not to remand him.
Police searched Smith's rented room and found mechanic uniforms in his closet, but no other evidence tying him to Brucia.
When officers found drug paraphernalia in his car, Smith was taken into custody for a parole violation. Joseph Smith's brother, John, was then shown the CCTV footage and he agreed to help the FBI to get a confession from him. "If it's him," John cautioned, "you won't get it out of him." And yet on February 5, Smith called his brother John, who was then able to take FBI agents and a local officer to the Central Church of Christ, and directed them to a nearby field 2.8 miles from the site of Brucia's abduction. While at the church, John received another call from his brother, who described the location of Brucia's body. In a field behind the church, 11-year-old Carlie Brucia was found lying on her back, a deep ligature mark prominent on her neck. She was naked below the waist, apart from a sock on her right foot, with her right leg outstretched and her left leg curled underneath her. During that phone call, Smith had admitted that he had rough sex with Brucia before strangling her. The Sarasota County Medical Examiner determined that Carlie Brucia had been strangled from behind, and abrasions on the side of her body indicated that she had been dragged to her final resting place. A semen sample found on her shirt matched Joseph Smith's DNA profile, and 2 of Brucia's head hairs were recovered from the yellow station wagon he had borrowed, with 7 fibers matching the red shirt that Brucia was wearing. Smith had disposed of Brucia's backpack and clothing in different trash bins.
All of this evidence was enough to charge Smith with Brucia's abduction and murder. Convicted on all charges, Smith was sentenced to death on March 15, 2006.
In 2018, Smith's sentence was commuted to life, but then it was reinstated to a death sentence in April 2020. However, Smith died on death row of unknown circumstances on July 26, 2021, according to the Herald Tribune. The police have also suspected Smith in the unsolved murder of Tara Riley, whose naked body was found in a retention pond behind a Walmart in Bradenton, Florida, in 2000. Brucia's horrifying death did incite legal action, however. In 2004, a bill named Carlie's Law was proposed, which amended existing laws to toughen parole rules for sex offenders. The bill, however, failed to pass Congress and appears to have been abandoned. Tragedy followed Brucia's family. In July 2005, Brucia's mother lost custody of her 7-year-old son after she failed a drug test, according to the Tampa Bay Times. At the time, Shorpen said she had turned to drugs because the pain within my reality is too much to bear. Sadly, she died of a heroin overdose in April 2017. After 3 decades without answers, police identified the suspect in the murder of 19-year-old Kathy Swartz. Through extensive investigation, it was found that Swartz put up a valiant fight against her attacker on December 2, 1988, according to Three Rivers Police Department. However, Swartz died of multiple stab wounds, a vicious beating, and strangulation, all while her 9-month-old daughter Courtney was in the next room. Michigan State Police crime scene technicians found fingerprints, blood, and a footprint at the crime scene, according to the department. Officers also interviewed thousands of people as well as collected fingerprints and footprints, but did not find a match. By the 2000s, DNA technology allowed officers to enter the DNA profile into CODIS, a combined DNA index system, but years continued to go by without a match. In 2022, Three Rivers Police Department and Michigan State Police utilized forensic genetic genealogy, which narrowed the suspect pool to a single family. Forensic genealogy isolated it to 4 people, Michigan State Police Detective First Lieutenant Chuck Christensen said. When we get to that point, then it's up to us to get additional samples from individuals that have been identified to determine if that person is in fact the contributor to that DNA. Christensen said the 4 suspects were all brothers. There was an idea in the investigators' minds of who the likely suspect would have been based on history of each of the brothers. After interviews, fingerprinting, and DNA testing, officers said they identified the murder suspect as 53-year-old Robert Waters. Officers traveled to South Carolina to interview Waters, and gathered enough probable cause to arrest Waters for open murder, according to the department. I think he had an idea at some point police would arrive and want to talk to him, and it's hard to say what would be going through your mind after 35 years, Christensen said. Waters was taken into custody Sunday in Beaufort, South Carolina, according to the St. Joseph County Office of the Prosecuting Attorney. Under Sheriff Jason Bingaman is working on arrangements to transfer Waters back to the county. While nothing can replace the loss of Kathy Swartz and the impact this senseless tragedy has had, we hope the identification and arrest of a suspect will bring some long-awaited closure to her family and friends, department officials said. Along with Michigan State Police, students at Western Michigan University's Cold Case Project helped in solving the 3 decades-long murder by scanning and organizing nearly 10,000 documents. Really, we knew this case was kind of coming to a close, so we started doing timelines and a list of people and kind of filling in the blanks they didn't really have, said Rachel Moore, rising WMU senior and member of the Cold Case program. I think the detectives kind of had an idea, but they wouldn't really say who. We kind of had an idea, so we didn't go too much into finding other suspects, but really just kind of finding things about this certain person that would just be 100% this is the guy. Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten, WMU Cold Case Project Director, beamed with pride as she talked about her students' work. This one in particular, this entire room that we are in was filled with piles and piles of material from the case file. They categorized it and knew this case like the back of their hand, she said. I really hope that this knowledge of Kathy's case helps give her family members, particularly her daughter who was present when the murder took place, I hope it gives young Courtney peace. Just peace. In 2021, WMU students teamed up with Michigan State Police to try to solve cold case homicides. Notably, the university program helped solve the 1987 Niles murder of Roxanne Woods. Patrick Gillum, 67, was a free man for 35 years before DNA evidence connected him. Fawn Cox was a well-liked 16-year-old high school student whose death shocked her family. She was found dead in her bedroom on July 21, 1989, raped and strangled. After years of being unable to find her killer, and unable to pay to set up a database for advanced DNA techniques, the Kansas City Police Department worked with a local FBI office to discover the girl's killer 31 years after the murder was committed. Fawn Marie Cox was a junior at Northeast High School and a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park. The paper reported that she was not a drug user and attended Sheffield Assembly of God Church. According to reports, Cox worked her job at Worlds of Fun until 11 p.m., went home and went to bed because she had to work the next day. That night, Cox's sister, Felisa, said the family dog seemed agitated, but blamed that on the dog's pregnancy. As air conditioner units cooled the summer air, someone snuck through a window into Cox's room, raped and strangled her. The nature of the crime later led Kansas City Police Department Sergeant Ben Caldwell to believe that the suspect knew Fawn because he chose a specific window and went in and out undetected. Felisa was with her mother, Beverly Cox, when they found Fawn. In the morning, she said she heard her older sister's alarm go off. I went over to shake her, come on. Get up. But she had been gone for a while. The Manhattan Mercury reported in 1989 that the police said they had no suspects at the time. However, DNA was collected from the scene. In 2000, the family donated $3,000 in hopes that a reward would lead to the discovery of Cox's killer. Money does do a lot of talking on the streets. That's what we're hoping and praying for, Beverly Cox said. Police had not given up on the case, having arrested a neighbor and 3 suspects who were charged in connection with Fawn's death. However, those charges were dropped when the DNA did not provide conclusive matches. Instead, police theorized that her death was part of a botched robbery. Amber Gonzalez, Cox's sister, told Fox 4 that she was traumatized by the case and ended up in the hospital because she became so obsessed and overwhelmed by it. I looked up to her so much, she said, now 45. I wanted to be just like her. She was my protector. In 2000, Kansas City Police Detective Jay Thompson said, newer forensic science might help. However, the family fought for years to have DNA evidence from the scene tested. Advanced testing costs were described as prohibitive by the KCPD, who said testing was too expensive. At one point, Caldwell told the Kansas City Star, "Whoever killed her either has never been charged with a felony or is no longer alive. People don't start killing and then quit and stay out of trouble as if they fell off the face of the earth." Caldwell would turn out to be right. In 2019, Caldwell started to collect money to establish a genealogy program. "It would take hopefully volunteers from the community, if we could establish a fund like that," he said. "Right now, we're working to try and get the money, and we could see kind of a pilot program where we could gain additional money and sustain it." In March, they worked with the FBI to secure funding and eventually discovered that the blood and semen evidence left at the scene belonged to Cox's cousin, Fox 4 reported, who was 21 at the time of the murder, died in 2006. Her cousin, Donald Cox Jr., died from a drug overdose. Felicia Cox said, "It's a relief there's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure." Gonzalez added that she was surprised that the person who killed her sister was a relative, but the news has brought closure. "I don't know how to explain it. It's the happiest moment. I can't be nothing but happy. This is what I've been praying for my family," she said. On October 9, 1988, Gail Barris was spotted leaving a coffee shop in the early hours of the morning, accompanied by a man. This was the last time Barris was ever seen alive. She was a 30-year-old single mother of 3 from Michigan. Life was hard and she worked at 2 different local bars to be able to survive and take care of her 3 children. In the early hours of October 9, 1988, between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., Barris was spotted leaving Speed's coffee shop in Battle Creek, Michigan. She was accompanied by a dark-haired man, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. On October 25, hunters from Emmett and nearby town made a horrifying discovery. They found a lifeless body of a woman lying on River Road. The authorities quickly identified the body to be that of Gail Barris, and an extensive investigation followed. Witnesses were identified and interviewed, and evidence was collected from the crime scene. On October 22, just a few days before Barris's body was discovered and almost 2 weeks after her disappearance, a 24-year-old man named Roger Plato was approached by authorities. Plato's car matched the description from a victim of a different abduction and assault case. At 4:30 p.m., authorities attempted to detain him at gunpoint while he was walking to his car at a parking lot in Bellevue. Plato became aggressive, refused to cooperate, and started fighting back. He was shot when he tried to wrestle the gun from a detective and as a result died from the injuries. He was never interviewed. Authorities performed an autopsy and a blood sample was taken before the body was cremated, which was stored at a private lab at the time. Investigators of Barrister's case turned their attention to Plato's friend and former roommate, Richard Compton. Compton had a vast criminal career, but when approached by investigators, he backed off and denied knowing anything. With no further leads or developments, Barris's case eventually went cold. In 2018, Battle Creek cold case detective Scott Marshall reopened the case. One of his first discoveries was that Compton's DNA had never been tested, so made Compton his #1 suspect. After some investigation, Detective Marshall discovered that Compton had died in 2009 and his body was buried in the County International Cemetery in Austin, Texas. Compton was just 59 years old when he died. Detective Marshall got a search warrant and traveled to Texas to exhume Compton's body. After examination, it was discovered that Compton's DNA samples didn't match that found in Barris's body, but matched previously unidentified hairs connected to the crime scene. In November 2020, a break in the case emerged almost by luck. Sergeant Chris Spastic of the Callahan County Sheriff's Department was taking an inventory of evidence at the department and found a vial containing the blood sample taken from Plato. On January 30, 2021, it was announced that a state police lab connected the blood to DNA found on Gail Barris's body, confirming Plato as responsible for assaulting her and taking her life. It's almost likely that Compton witnessed that happening. Both men have already died and they never had to pay for this horrible crime. However, the Barros family has expressed their relief on finally being able to have some kind of closure. Detective Marshall said DNA technology is the future for solving cold cases.
Molly McLaren was the unfortunate victim of her ex-partner's murderous rage.
When the 23-year-old matched with Joshua Stimson on Tinder, she could never have imagined the horrific nightmare that would follow.
Molly McLaren was 23 years old and a student at the University of Kent.
In 2016, Molly met a man named Joshua Stimson on the dating app, Tinder. The pair didn't meet face-to-face until later that year in October, and they began dating shortly afterwards. However, in June 2018, Molly ended the relationship for good, and shortly after Stimson began harassing her online by posting derogatory messages and photos. McLaren had told friends in social media messages that she was scared of her ex-partner and went with her mother, Joanna, to North Kent Police Station. A police officer called Stimson and warned him to stop or face prosecution. He was spoken to by police for a second time just 2 days before murdering McLaren. 2 days before the murder, Stimson was caught on CCTV purchasing a knife from Asda in Chatham. Less than 30 minutes later, he also bought a pickaxe from Homebase. On June 29, 2018, Molly had been working out at the gym when she was approached by Stimson, who had been stalking her after they split 12 days before. The terrified student had confronted her ex and asked if he was following her before making her way back to her Citroën in Chatham Dockside Outlet Car Park. She texted her mom, Joanne, at 10:45 a.m. saying, "Mom, he's turned up at the gym and come next to me," before exchanging 20 messages with a pal about Stimson's behavior. The 23-year-old had no idea her killer was laying in wait with a bag containing the 2 knives and pickaxe he used to butcher her. Once she was in the driver's seat, Stimson abandoned his vehicle, yanked open her door and launched a violent flurry of knife blows. Molly tried to fight him off, screaming and beeping her horn, but she died within minutes. Stimson grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, but later lived in Woodham, near Rochester. The warehouse worker was 26 when he met Molly on Tinder, and the couple dated for 4 months in November 2016 before they briefly split. She finally ended the relationship for good on June 17, 2018, just 12 days before she died, but obsessed Stimson began posting derogatory comments and photos about the part-time barmaid on Facebook. These included lies about her using cocaine, and he tagged people so that all her family could see. Molly had told her mom before her death she had seen posts online from Stimson after they broke up which said, "There's more to come." The pair were so concerned they circulated photos of him to neighbors, and Molly reported the posts to police on June 22. 2 ex-girlfriends told the court previously how Stimson had stalked them after they split. Alexandra Dale said he would follow her and take pictures of her and also send her a photo of her back garden and threatened to drown her on holiday. While Leah Hubbard said he spat drink all over her in a nightclub after they split, then waited outside for hours for her to leave. Police had also been warned twice to stay away from Molly and was last spoken to by cops on June 27 last year, 2 days before her death. Kent Police reported itself to the Independent Police Complaints Commission after Molly's death. Stimson was jailed for life with a minimum of 26 years, after jurors took less than 3 hours to convict him of murder. Stimson had admitted manslaughter with diminished responsibility on the basis of an abnormality of functioning arising from a mental condition at Maidstone Crown Court, but jurors rejected his plea. After her death, Molly's friends and family set up the Molly McLaren Foundation donation page, which raised thousands for charity. The charity will select groups that support people with eating disorders to distribute the money to. It will also raise awareness of eating disorders and the work charities do. A statement on the Just Giving page reads, "For those of you who were close to Molly, you will know that she battled with bulimia and subsequently anxiety, as a result of an eating disorder, for many years of her life. Instead of letting this beat her, she shared her own story in the hopes of empowering others around her. We want to create a legacy in her honor by channeling her passion and drive to create the most positive outcome possible through the creation of the Molly McLaren Foundation." Since her death, the foundation has hosted Molly Fest, a charity festival raising money for the Molly McLaren Foundation. On June 20, 2008, a jury found that Sheila LaBarre was sane when she murdered 2 boyfriends in Epping, New Hampshire. LaBarre admitted to killing Michael DeLogg and Kenneth County in 2005 and 2006, respectively, claiming God had made her an avenging angel, sent to earth to punish pedophiles. In her mind, this included DeLogg and County, whose remains were found on her 115-acre farm. There seemed to be no basis whatsoever in reality to any suggestion or any claim that her victims were pedophiles. engaged in pedophilia or were child abusers.
None whatsoever, Brad Bailey, a defense attorney who represented LaBarre, tells A&E True Crime.
And that, too, was something that informed the insanity defense I pursued at trial. The jury rejected LaBarre's plea, finding her guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentencing her to life in prison, where she remains today. At her trial in 2008, psychiatrist Dr. Roger Gray described LaBarre's childhood as populated with people who could use her however they wanted and wouldn't protect her, and populated with a real threat of death. He also testified that the painful memories likely contributed to her decisions as an adult. During Gray's testimony, LaBarre broke down and had to be escorted from the courtroom. Her childhood had been nightmarish. Michael Benson, who wrote a book about LaBarre's life, The Burn Farm, tells A&E True Crime. She was sexually and emotionally abused by her dad and his friends, facts corroborated by her older sister, who also endured the abuse. Born in Alabama in 1958, LaBarre graduated from Fort Payne High School in 1976 and had several unsuccessful marriages. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility in the early 1980s after attempting suicide. Ronnie Jennings, her husband at the time, claimed her mood swings often turned violent. Sheila's mood disorders were severe enough to cause her to be psychotic at times, but there was not enough evidence to show that mental illness caused Sheila to commit her future crimes, Benson says. LaBarre moved to Epping, New Hampshire in 1987, after she answered a personal ad placed by local chiropractor Wilfred "Bill" LaBarre. Although she never legally married Bill LaBarre, she took his last name and lived with him until he died in 2000.
Claiming she was Bill LaBarre's common-law wife, LaBarre later inherited his entire estate, including the farm, despite objections from the deceased's children.
When LaBarre was young, she swallowed a bottle of pills, slid into a car and drove until she passed out at the wheel and crashed, says Benson.
She was rushed to a hospital and spent more than a week in a coma.
When she awoke, she claimed that she had died and found herself seated at a table with various men who all had long beards.
LaBarre insisted one of the men was God.
She was told, by God, that her work on earth was not through and returned to her life under orders to kill pedophiles, to kill perverts like the men who had hurt her when she was little, Benson says. After she lured DeLog and County, a young man with a learning disability whom LaBarre met via a personal ad, to her farm, she subjected the men to physical and mental abuse.
Prior to County's death, 2 police officers recalled seeing him in a wheelchair inside a local Walmart, covered in bruises and burns.
Sheila taped the audio of her torture sessions, tapes she could listen to after the victim was ashes and bones on the lawn, sessions in which she would force her victims to admit they were pedophiles, says Benson. Several days after the Walmart sighting, LaBarre made a bizarre phone call to Epping police in which she played audio of County confessing to being a pedophile. When police conducted a welfare check, they noticed a burn pile containing what looked like a large, fleshy human bone fragments and a pair of sneakers. A search warrant was issued, and authorities arrested LaBarre on April 2, 2006, after she attempted to flee. Even after human remains had been found on her property, LaBarre was left alone to destroy evidence while the cops went to get a search warrant, says Benson. By the time they got back, the most impressive human bone and the victim's sneakers were nowhere to be found. Police conducted a 3-week search of LaBarre's farm, during which they discovered an incinerated mattress, human bones and blood splatter in various locations throughout the house. LaBarre admitted to stabbing County to death before burning his body. She also confessed to killing DeLog and burning his body, but it is unknown how he died. At the time that I represented her, I would describe Sheila as a severely mentally ill individual, says Bailey. Both our mental health experts were in agreement that Sheila was suffering from a substantial mental health disease or defect, such that she could not conform her behavior to the conduct of the law, or appreciate the difference between right and wrong, which is the standard in many states for an insanity defense. Based on observations and conversations with LaBarre, including multiple psychiatric evaluations, her defense team deemed there was viable ground to argue a lack of criminal responsibility, as defined by New Hampshire law, even though she admitted to 2 homicides. This is called not guilty by reason of insanity in other states. Also unique in New Hampshire, the burden of proving that someone is insane or not criminally responsible is on the defense. In many other states, such as Massachusetts where my home practice is based, it's different in that once it's raised by the defense, the burden is on the prosecution to prove that somebody isn't faking, says Bailey. So, I had the very unusual experience of putting evidence in front of the jury that established how severely mentally ill Sheila was. Among the evidence, Bailey and his team described an incident where LaBarre took a hatchet and hacked into a trailer where her boyfriend at the time was sleeping. They also detailed her taking a revolver and firing shots at another boyfriend as he ran through a field. And they brought in witnesses who testified they saw LaBarre order her victims into the trunk of her car and believe she kept the men in cages on her property. In June 2002, the jury rejected the defense, finding LaBarre guilty of first-degree murder. While it's difficult to speculate what forms a jury's basis of opinion, Bailey believes that even if the jury understood lack of criminal responsibility, they likely considered LaBarre a future risk to society. In their minds, they might have thought Sheila was too dangerous and that she might one day get out if she was placed in a mental health facility.
LaBarre admitted to and was convicted of 2 homicides, which meets the FBI's current definition of a serial killer.
While conducting a search of the LaBarre property in 2006, investigators also discovered 3 human toes near the farm. A forensic analysis determined the remains did not belong to either County or DeLog, and a DNA match has not yet surfaced.
There has also been speculation that LaBarre killed Bill LaBarre, an allegation she denies.
LaBarre is currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole at the New Hampshire Correctional Facility for Women in Concord, New Hampshire.
Police in Indiana have revealed a cold case murder dating back to 1980 appears to have been solved after a tipster came forward to say they knew who killed the teenage victim. Shelley Ann Werner was 15 years old the last time she was seen alive at Wolt's grocery store in Mishawaka on June 15, 1980.
10 days later, her body was found, partially clothed with a gunshot wound to her head, near an abandoned set of train tracks on Madison Road. Despite interviewing nearly 150 people in the initial years of the case, police did not identify any suspects as Werner's disappearance made regional and national headlines. On Wednesday, after 43 years, cold case investigators now believe they've solved Werner's murder. Based on information provided by a key witness, cold case investigators with the Mishawaka Police Department say they've identified 3 men who were involved in Werner's abduction and murder. The men are all now deceased, so no criminal charges will be filed, but police hope the knowledge of who the perpetrators likely were brings closure to Werner's family and the community. The fact that these subjects were deceased didn't change a thing.
"We wanted to get the closure to the family," said James Campbell, a former South Bend police detective who now volunteers on cold cases in Mishawaka.
Officials did not identify the suspects since they are deceased, but detectives said they were all around 5 to 10 years older than Werner, and that she would have known them, but wasn't friends with them.
Investigators struggled for years with no conclusive DNA evidence to go on.
That changed, detectives said, a few years ago when a key witness came forward with information about Werner's disappearance. Campbell, who worked the case along with David Doseman, Tim Corbett, Sam Walsh and Donna Newcomer, said the witness was a woman who was intimidated by the suspects, and only when 2 of them died did she feel comfortable talking to police. The reason some of these things take so long is the fear and threats these suspects put towards witnesses, Campbell said. They threaten them and their families, and that's exactly what happened in this case. Investigators then set up to corroborate the leads from the witness and found the 3rd suspect had also died in 2018. The case was first looked at by the St. Joseph County Metro Homicide Unit, but then moved to the Mishawaka Police Department's cold case team when the homicide unit disbanded in late 2021. The announcement marks an end to the 43-year-old homicide, though Mishawaka's cold case unit is currently looking into 7 other unsolved murder cases and asks anyone with information to contact law enforcement. After 16-year-old Emma Walker broke up with her boyfriend Riley Gall, he eventually grew enraged enough to kill her, then posted a message on Twitter to cover his tracks. In 2016, 16-year-old Emma Walker seemed to be living her teenage dream. She was a cheerleader at Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was surrounded by loving friends, and she was even dating a boy on the football team. But that fall, everything came crashing down when she broke up with 18-year-old Riley Gall, and he killed her because of it. Gall and Walker had started dating 2 years prior when Gall was a junior and Walker was a freshman. As their relationship progressed, however, Walker's friends and family noticed that Gall was becoming more controlling. Not long after Gall started college in 2016, Walker decided to end their relationship, but Gall didn't take it well.
He took drastic measures to get Walker's attention, including faking his own kidnapping.
Then, in the early morning hours of November 21, 2016, Gall crept up outside of Walker's house and fired 2 shots through the wall of her bedroom. Her mother found her dead the next morning, and she immediately told investigators that she suspected Gall. However, it wasn't until 2 of Gall's friends helped the police carry out a sting operation that the unhinged ex-boyfriend was brought to justice. Riley Gall, a wide receiver on the Central High School football team, first caught Emma Walker's eye when she started cheering during her freshman year. He wasn't a classic jock but a funny, intelligent young man who loved playing video games and had a nerdy side. Mark and Jill Walker, Emma's parents, thought he was a great fit for their daughter at first. Jill said he was very likable, and Mark recalled that he was a very nice-looking young man, well-mannered. But Walker's friends and family soon began to realize that Gall had a controlling side.
Lauren Hutton, one of Walker's classmates, said, "He got more possessive and more clingy toward her and wouldn't let her do certain things."
Over the 2 years they dated, Gall and Walker frequently broke up and got back together, often having really dramatic fights. At one point, Gall sent her Snapchat messages that read, "I hate you, I hate everything about you, and you're dead to me.
I'll check the obituary. F you."
When Walker's parents saw these messages, they immediately banned Gall from their home and took their daughter's cell phone away, but Gall gave her an iPod Touch so they could still stay in contact. Finally, around Halloween of 2016, Walker ended things with Gall for good. Mark Walker noted, "She did become like her old self again. She would come out of her room, eat dinner with us, and socialize with us." Tragically, Emma Walker would only be able to enjoy her newfound freedom for a few short weeks before Gall snatched it from her forever. On November 18, 2016, just a few weeks after breaking up with Gall, Emma Walker attended a party at her friend's house. According to the Knoxville News-Sentinel, around 11:30 p.m. she received a text message from an anonymous number that read, "Go to your car with your keys. Go alone, I've got someone you love. If you don't comply, I will hurt them." Walker suspected the texts were from her ex, so she and a group of her friends walked outside and found Riley Gall lying face down in a ditch.
He claimed he'd been kidnapped and couldn't remember anything because his captives had hit him in the head, but Walker didn't believe him and walked away. The very next day, Walker saw an eerie stranger dressed in black outside her house. News reports that she texted her friends, "I'm home alone and somebody in all black walked down my street and came to my door and rang the doorbell over and over again. I thought I was going to die." Terrified, she reached out to the only person she could think of at the moment, Riley Gall. She told him, "I hate you but I need you right now," and he replied, "I'm coming, I'm speeding, just give me a minute." When Walker's mother arrived home shortly thereafter and saw her daughter outside with Gall, she was livid. She asked him to leave and told Walker that the stranger in black had probably been Gall all along. The next day, Sunday, November 20th, Walker's parents followed her to work and back home to ensure that she was safe. Around 12 a.m., she went to bed, and that was the last time they saw her alive. At 6 a.m. on Monday, November 21, 2016, Jill Walker went into her daughter's room to wake her up for school and found her unresponsive. She immediately called the police, who rushed to the home to investigate. At first, they believed Walker may have taken her own life, but then they spotted a strange hole in her bedroom wall. Knox County Sheriff's Deputy Nikki Buells recalled to ABC News, "There was a hole in the wall, it appeared to be a bullet hole. At that point, I knew that it probably was not a suicide." Further investigation revealed a second hole in the wall and 2 bullet casings in the yard outside. There was just a small amount of blood on Walker's pillow, but it was clear that she'd been fatally shot behind her left ear. Another officer on the case, Lieutenant Alan Merritt, started interviewing friends and family members, and noted that the same name came up over and over again. "Everybody kept giving us the name Riley Gall because of their relationship, because they had seen the way that Riley had treated her, the way he'd talked to her," Merritt said. Meanwhile, Gall was busy crafting posts on Facebook and Twitter about Walker's death. "Rest easy now, sweetheart," he wrote in one tweet. "I love you forever and always." Despite Gall's mournful messages, investigators quickly brought him in for questioning about Emma Walker's death. Detective James Hurst told ABC News, "When I first met him, I thought he might have been a grieving boyfriend. When we got into the interview room and sat down, I felt like there was a dark side. He didn't have a whole lot of passion or concern." Gall told police that Walker had blocked his number the night of her death after they had yet another argument over the phone, and he'd cried in his car for 2 or 3 hours before going to bed. The whole time, however, he never referred to Emma Walker by her name, referring to her only as the girl. Although the interview was suspicious, police had no solid evidence they could use to charge Gall with Walker's murder until 2 of his close friends came forward to help. 2 of Riley Gall's friends from college, Alex McCarty and Noah Walton, quickly told investigators that Gall had displayed some concerning actions since his breakup with Walker. Soon after the relationship ended, Gall had taken a handful of Vicodin and washed it down with alcohol in an apparent suicide attempt. On Saturday, November 19th, the day after Gall's supposed kidnapping, he'd told McCarty that he'd stolen his grandfather's gun in order to protect himself. He then asked Walton how to get fingerprints off of a gun, and he eventually asked both of his friends to help him dispose of the weapon. According to reports, Gall swore to his friends that he hadn't killed Walker, but he wanted to toss the gun into the Tennessee River because he was worried the police would unfairly connect him to the crime if they learned he had it. Suspicious of Gall's true motives, McCarty and Walton teamed up with investigators to reveal the truth. They were fitted with cameras and microphones as they accompanied Gall to dump the gun that he'd used to kill Walker. Thanks to McCarty and Walton, the police swooped in just in time to find Gall in possession of the murder weapon, gloves, and black clothing, the same kind Walker had seen the stranger outside her house wearing. At his trial, Riley Gall was found guilty of first-degree murder, stalking, theft, reckless endangerment, and possession of a firearm during a felony, earning him an automatic life sentence. To the end, though, he maintained that he never meant to harm Emma Walker. "I wanted to scare her," Gall told Walker's family at his sentencing hearing. "I never meant to take Emma's life." More than a decade after the death of Kevin Drinks, 4 men have been convicted for his murder in what prosecutors say was a case of mistaken identity. Drinks was killed in 2011 after being mistaken for a witness expected to testify in a criminal case. Chad Reynolds, Michael Blackston, Samaj Armstead and Rashawn Combs were all found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and related charges in the December 10, 2011 killing. On Monday morning, Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner spoke near the spot where Drinks was killed near Broad Street and Girard Avenue in North Philadelphia. Krasner said Drinks was under surveillance for a full day after he was improperly believed to be the person testifying in a Philadelphia trial, even though he had nothing to do with the case. He was killed in a killing of mistaken identity. There was an assassination of the person they believed to be a witness for the purpose of silencing that witness, Krasner said. Drinks was mistaken as a witness in the murder of Kristen Freeman, which was what the killers thought when they pulled the trigger. The case went unsolved until 2017, when a Philadelphia police detective was investigating a separate case and listening to coded conversations from the prison, which implicated 4 people in the killing of Drinks. What they were discussing over and over again was the description of the witness, where he works, what kind of car he drives, and formulating a plot to kill him, said Assistant DA Ashley Toxilowski. That plot came to fruition in December. Keena Drinks, Kevin's widow, admitted it was tough waiting and watching the case progress. Kevin Drinks was a hard-working innocent citizen shot and killed on the streets of Philadelphia through gun violence, mistaken identity, she said. "First you cry, then you want to know why." Keena Drinks praised the DAs assigned to the case, who she said cared about the loss of her husband in a senseless act of violence. She said over the years it was difficult believing that her husband's killers would be found and convicted. "I did lose a little bit of faith, but I still fought to find out what happened. I lost a little bit of faith in the police system and the justice system." Drinks urged other people in similar situations to press police and prosecutors about their cold cases because they can be solved. She admitted she was annoying to police at times, but added that police gave her the respect to call her when they made the arrests. Drinks said she will now become an advocate for victims of crime and help others suffering the same fate as she did, as an example of how cold cases can be solved. Drinks and her friends and relatives removed pins they wore for a decade to remember the homicide. They didn't need them anymore, they said, because justice has been done in the case. Reynolds, Blackston, and Armstead have all been sentenced to life in prison without parole. Combs, who was convicted of third-degree murder, likely faces at least 30 years behind bars. His sentencing is scheduled for June 29th. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and click the bell icon to stay tuned.